Modern Love, the podcast, is made possible with support from Living Proof. Living Proof's dry shampoo is so good at actually cleaning hair that you can take a spin class and not wash your hair after. Use the code LOVE at livingproof.com for a free travel-size dry shampoo with your $20 order. We are the science. You are the living proof. And by Squarespace, providing tools that help people showcase their passions with a customized landing page, website, or online store. Also offering domains, hosting, and 24/7 support. Get your free trial at squarespace.com/modernlove. You should. Squarespace.
From the New York Times and WBUR Boston, this is Modern Love. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. I'm your host, Meghna Chakrabarty. Think about the most embarrassing, awful, cataclysmically bad date you've ever been on. Did it end in the emergency room? No? Okay, good. Well, then it probably went at least a little better than the date Brian Giddis wrote about in his Modern Love column. And who better to bring us a story of a romantic mishap than Judd Apatow, director of films like Trainwreck, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and Knocked Up. Here's his reading of Brian's story, titled At the Hospital, an Interlude of Clarity.
There's never a good time to fall off your couch onto a martini glass, nick a major blood vessel, and begin losing a dangerous amount of blood. But having this happen in the middle of a promising date is an especially bad time. I demonstrated this last spring while on my fourth date with a Brazilian woman so beautiful I was almost afraid of her. After dinner in a homey Italian restaurant, we walked back to the apartment I had just moved into in Brooklyn. Living in the city for the first time without roommates, I was eager to take advantage of my newfound privacy, and things were going well. There's something romantic about drinking from fancy glasses in an unfurnished room full of unpacked boxes, Miles Davis's In a Silent Way spun on the record player. I was amazed to have gotten this far. As my friends were sick of hearing, it made no sense to me that a gorgeous woman in her early 20s who spoke 4 languages and had lived on 3 continents was spending her Saturdays with me, a 31-year-old bookish type from Pittsburgh. Each outing felt as if I were sneaking into an exclusive club, and at the end of the night I always feared I would be discovered and asked to leave. I realize that meeting someone wonderful is the whole point of dating, but actually being with someone wonderful can be too stressful for me to enjoy. This stress is typical for me. I've been on anti-anxiety medication for about 10 years, and on dates I'm consistently asking myself, was that the wrong thing to say? Do I seem nervous? Will obsessing about being nervous make me appear more nervous? Not unusual questions to ask yourself when meeting new people, but for me they can be paralyzing. Even if the evening goes well, I often appreciate it only later and from a distance, as if it had happened to someone else, like dating in the third person. So far, my success with this particular woman had been an exercise in ignoring the reality of it, which apparently also led me to ignore the reality of my surroundings in general. As she unraveled herself from our embrace on the couch to use the bathroom, I fell onto the after-dinner drink she had left on the floor, the glass slicing into the soft underside of my upper arm. When I looked down, I glimpsed my exposed triceps and more blood than I had ever seen in my life. The cut had gone nearly to the bone. This is not the first time a date ended with me in the emergency room. I seem to have a knack for it. My college girlfriend once served undercooked chicken that gave me hallucinations in a fever of 104. Years later, my attempt to cook breakfast for another woman ended in second-degree burns after I managed to set fire to a paper towel. But the severity of this injury, its unfortunate timing, and the fact that I was naked all broke new ground. In the ambulance, the emergency medical workers held together my arm, but their questions threatened to unravel my subterfuge as an acceptable mate to this accomplished young woman. "How old are you?" one asked, which put our substantial age difference, something we had not yet talked about, suddenly under a spotlight. "Are you on any medication?" "Antidepressants and Klonopin," I reluctantly answered. Then to her, "Is he your boyfriend? Your friend?" Long pause. "Boyfriend," she blurted uncomfortably. Then an instant later, "Friend." Even though I was riding in an ambulance to surgery, that one still stung. To the entertainment of the hospital's overnight staff, I was still half naked when I arrived. My date had managed to get pants on me while we waited for the ambulance, but as I hadn't been able to let go of my arm at the time, my shirt would go on only halfway. Being wheeled into surgery like this, alongside a woman in a sexy dress, pretty much screamed sex injury. The next hour was a chaotic blur of x-rays, questions I struggled not to panic about. Why does this waiver form ask for my religious preference? When I asked, I'm not going to lose my arm, am I? The answer was a troubling, I don't think so. Physical humiliation was next on the agenda. Before the operation, my date got to watch a nurse move my pasty, fluorescent-lit body out of my bloody jeans and into a hospital gown. I pictured us sitting at dinner a week from now, this unflattering snapshot of me hovering between us as I pointed at what I wanted on the menu to the waiter with my hook arm. Then it was time. I remember that the lights in the operating room were very bright, and I remember being told they were about to start the anesthesia. And suddenly, oblivion. I woke in a haze. My arm and my date were both still with me. The operation had gone well, but protocol required me to stay in the emergency room for 6 more hours. This registered briefly as a terrifying amount of time for a woman and me to be left alone with no dim lighting, no alcohol, no movie to watch or appetizers to eat, and no escape hatch in the event of awkwardness. I'll never know if my calm was psychological, a cocktail of adrenaline, morphine, and utter relief, or physiological. After 6 hours of unbroken embarrassment and fear, I was simply too exhausted. Whatever the reason, I felt fine. My date's eyes stared into mine with an uncomplicated tenderness that made my head swim. This, I thought, is what it's like to be with this woman. Neither of us had changed, but I was in a different world. Those 6 hours sailed by gloriously. We traded hospital stories and endless jokes about martini glasses. We talked about books and our families. We came up with an absurd screenplay idea, a horror movie set in a hospital. I was talking and laughing and effortlessly connecting with one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. A woman I was truly falling for. When I was finally released, our mid-morning cab ride back to my neighborhood felt like a lucid dream. We ate egg sandwiches in the park and returned to find the familiar surroundings of my living room splattered with blood. Through a haze of sleep deprivation and residual morphine, I felt like a ghost returning to the scene of my own murder. As we stood there mopping up bloody footprints with our Swiffers, surrounded by wadded-up pink paper towels, I thought, either you will never see this woman again, or she will stick around a long time. Neither happened. I would like to be able to say my story ends in an epiphany, with the end of my anxiety and the beginning of an enduring relationship. But the reality is, she left me about a month later. Not because she found me repulsive in the fluorescent light of the hospital, but for a more conventional reason. She missed her ex-boyfriend. Sometimes when a guy really likes a girl, he gets a tattoo on his arm. I got this prominent scar instead. But there are times when I finger its deep groove, and those 6 beautiful hours in the emergency room flicker in my head. Then I am reminded how close I am to an alternate world in which I am happy. A world that occupies the same space as this one, but is somehow distinct from it. And while that better world may be difficult to find, it is as close to me as the air in front of my face.
Director and producer Judd Apatow reading Brian Giddis's modern love piece, At the Hospital, an interlude of clarity. So is Brian any closer today to that alternate, happy reality he longed for in his piece? We'll find out after the break.
I'm I'm Katie at Living Proof, and we get love letters all the time, like this one. Dear Living Proof, I used to think my hair was too fine to hold a style, but now everyone tells me how thick and beautiful it looks. All my life, I struggled with and hated my hair. Now I love it, and I'm proud of it thanks to you. At this point, you'd have to pry your Prime Style Extender from my cold, dead hands. Love, Samantha. You can use the code LOVE for a free travel-sized dry shampoo with your $20 order. livingproof.com.
We're back. This is Modern Love, the podcast. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, and joining me now is the author of that piece, Brian Gittes. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Also with us, of course, is Daniel Jones, editor of the Modern Love column for the New York Times. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
So, Brian, my first question that just I have to ask you is, you make yourself pretty vulnerable in this column here, verging on admitting to some humiliation, maybe. But what made you want to share it with all of those readers of the New York Times?
Most of the time that I was working on it, I didn't think about anyone reading it at all. A friend kind of gave me the idea to write it, but I think when he suggested it, he was half joking, and I was kind of half jokingly writing it. I honestly didn't think it was going to get picked, so I didn't have a lot of time to think about what it would be like to have lots and lots and lots of people read it.
So, Dan, in that case, why did you pick it?
Well, it's funny because, I like when I hear that someone says, I wrote it thinking no one would read it, because that's the sign of someone who is going deep and telling the truth and not trying to hide, I guess. And what I loved about this piece, it speaks to what so many people go through on a first date, trying to get to know somebody. And, you want to put your best foot forward and you want to not be vulnerable. And that just runs counter to what getting to know someone is all about. You have to be vulnerable. But what's funny about Brian's piece is he is forced into that vulnerability.
In the most literal way.
By falling onto a wine glass and being whisked to the hospital.
There was something about the way that you ended the column, Brian, that's really stuck with me, because you're talking about this alternative existence where you could feel happiness that's not quite there with you all the time, but it's there just in front of your face. I mean, do you still feel that way?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I don't think it wasn't an experience that sort of magically fixed all the problems I have with anxiety and that sort of thing. I mean, that's kind of an ongoing struggle, but it is a sort of touchstone, I guess, I can refer back to now as a point of reference, like a psychological and even spiritual point of reference.
Now you know what's possible in a way. It's not that you have to cut open your arm every time to make it happen, but the sense that it is there and that sort of deep connection, or just being real with someone and vulnerable with someone is there close. And I like that sort of realization at the end.
Brian, Judd Apatow narrated your story for us, and we actually also asked him why he chose this one. And here's what he said.
I think I was attracted to this essay because this is how I felt on dates. I really did think that every date was going to say they had to go to the bathroom and then climb out the window. And everything bad happened to me other than almost slicing open an artery. But there's still time for that.
And hopefully that's not going to happen to him.
That's great.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a universality in feeling vulnerable.
And it's almost a rock bottom scenario in this one. What could be worse, than being naked, completely naked, and about, on death's door with your blood loss.
I mean, actually, I'm curious, did the woman in the story, did she know that her experience with you in the emergency room was going to appear in the New York Times?
No, I mean, not until it was in the New York Times. She actually really liked the piece a lot, and then we ended up meeting up for a drink just to talk about it. And then weirdly, we sort of ended up going on a couple more dates, and then it kind of fizzled out again for good.
Now, given that you were talking about how that date wasn't the first time you'd ended up in the emergency room, has it happened since then too?
Be honest.
Actually, I met someone who I've been seeing about 6 months, And we actually ended up in the ER about 3 weeks ago. I was going to cook dinner for her at my apartment, and I had just been grocery shopping. And somehow, as I was taking the bag of groceries off my shoulder, I managed to dislocate my right thumb. So much less life-threatening.
So another bonding experience?
Yeah, this was a very positive one, though.
And let's hope that you stay out of the ER as you progress further through life.
Believe me, I'll do my best.
Well, Brian Giddis is the author of this week's story titled At the Hospital, an Interlude of Clarity. He's also the assistant director of publicity at a Manhattan book publisher. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
And Dan Jones, editor of the Modern Love column for the New York Times, is also author of Love Illuminated, Exploring Life's Most Mystifying Subject with the help of 50,000 strangers. Dan, thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Special thanks to Judd Apatow, who read this week's essay. His new comedy series is simply called Love, and it premieres February 19th on Netflix. And the 5th season of Girls starts on February 21st. Next week on Modern Love, Dakota Fanning brings us the story of falling off a cliff and falling in love.
I explained in my drug speech that he didn't have to come to the hospital or hang out with a broken girl all summer. No guilt. I'd call him when I was healed and back to normal. He stayed with me until a nurse kicked him out.
Modern Love is a production of the New York Times and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. It's produced, directed, and edited by Jessica Alpert, John Perotti, and Amory Sievertson. The idea for the Modern Love podcast was conceived by Lisa Tobin. Iris Adler is our executive producer. Daniel Jones is the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times and advisor to the show. Music for the podcast, courtesy of APM. Subscribe to Modern Love on your favorite podcast app and write us a review of this week's episode. You can also share your thoughts at facebook.com/modernlove and on Twitter. I'm at Meghna WBUR, that's MEGHNA WBUR, and Dan is at Dan Jones NYT. And we're still hoping you'll send us voice memos or emails telling us your favorite quotation about love. Here's one from Leah Singerman. It comes from one of her favorite TV shows, How I Met Your Mother.
Love doesn't make sense. You can't logic your way into or out of it. Love is totally nonsensical. But we have to keep doing it, or else we're lost and love is dead and humanity should just pack it in, because love is the best thing we do.
Well, we want more quotations. We're going to try to do something really special with them. So send your favorites to modernlove@wbur.org. And please make sure to tell us where you're from and how to pronounce your name, because we do like to get that stuff right. That's modernlove, all one word, @wbur.org. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Thanks for listening.